All right. Well, I guess we'll get rolling, and I will go into sharing my screen so that I won't be able to see any of you anymore. But thank you all again for being here. Just to briefly introduce myself and what we're up to today. My name's Mark Haller. I'm the founder and chairman of UK Urban Agritech. A few years back now, when COP26 was in Glasgow, I ran into a chap called Stephen Crozier, who's the founder of RheEnergise, one of our partners here, at a fringe event for COP26. It was something to do with green investment, if I remember rightly. I don't really remember the event, but he was telling me about novel pumped hydro, and I said, do you know what you should do is you should stick a vertical farm on that. It would be really cool to have this kind of closed loop renewable energy and storage thing. And he kind of narrowed his eyes and went, it's not a bad idea, that. Subsequent conversations took place. We came up with an idea. We got a bunch of partners come on board, and here we are, a couple of years down the line, I suppose now. What we thought we'd do is we'd have a webinar to tell you a bit about what we're doing, so that some of the partners can let you know the work they've been doing. But just to very briefly summarize, the VFAST project is vertical farming and storage technologies. It's bringing together renewable energy, energy storage, and vertical farming to the mutual benefit of all three, with a particular view towards protein-rich crop portfolios. So yeah, we will have our various partners from the James Hutton Institute and Advanced Plant Growth Centre, Intelligent Growth Solutions, aka IGS, and RheEnergise to tell you about the work that they've been doing. With that in mind, I'm going to hand you, hopefully if this will work, straight on over to the first of our talks, which you can see there is Tanveer Khan from IGS. So Tanveer, if you're there, please go ahead. We're going to leave my presentation up on the screen, so you can just tell me next slide when you're ready, okay?
Perfect, Mark. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Tanveer. I'm the head of science at IGS. And as Mark mentioned, this is a very interesting consortium where people from different disciplines, we come together to explore the possibility of working on vertical farms, not just in a controlled environment, but actually looking at the energy side of things as well as the storage side of things. Just a brief introduction about IGS. So we are a world-leading vertical farm technology company. Just to make the audience very clear here, we are not the grower. We develop the vertical farms, and then we provide the package about the growth recipes, the associated data with that, and then we provide the customer support and consultancy. So basically, it's a full package that we deliver to our customer, which is a grower, to enable them and have a smooth sailing into the sea. So that's who we are. Mark, can you please move the next slide? Right. IGS, it's very interesting because it was founded by a farmer and an engineer. And this is just a brief intro about the capital that we have raised. The most important piece is that we have secured 25 plus patents, and we are backed by some of the prominent investors like DC Thomson, S2G, Scottish Enterprise, and so on. Next slide, please. Right. This is just a key feature of our company, that we have different disciplines: engineering, agronomy, plant sciences, and data, because it's an integration of everything that actually leads to a successful growth and economic profitability for the customer. So we focus on the early stage research through our research network collaboration. We also focus on our internal research across all these disciplines, but then we convert this whole package into a profitable venture for the customer when we deliver the package. Moving on, next slide, please. Yep, so going through, these are just some of the high-level advantages of growing in a vertical farm, and we are proud to say in IGS vertical farm. So you have multiple cycles throughout the year. We deliver optimized growing recipes for the max yield for different types of customers across different continents. The produce is free from pesticides, herbicides. This is kind of known in the CEA industry. But the most prominent feature for us is that we are highly energy efficient. And if you go to our website, we talk about how our LEDs are extremely efficient compared to the other ones on the market, as well as the design in terms of the HVAC system that we've got. We are not weather dependent, so you can condition our vertical farms to any kind of weather, low temperature, high temperature. different spectrums of light regime. And the interesting thing for us is that it's not just we deliver a working recipe, but we aim for developing a scalable recipe to make our customers successful. Our vertical farms can be built in close proximity to ensure their success. Next slide, please. So this we can just go through quickly. So far, we have grown more than 250 crop species at our crop research center over here. And the system is well adapted. It's highly flexible. You can grow a monoculture crop, but you can also grow a mixed culture. That means anything from leafy greens, flower species, starter plants, and so on into our system. Next slide, please. Right. So this is quite interesting for anybody who is in controlled environment agriculture, that we always love to talk about lettuce. And that's the first thing that pops up. What's the lettuce yield that you are getting? For us, it was a bit about like think outside the box and move beyond lettuce. And that's when we discussed and we had a chat about the VFAST consortium. And that was a very interesting opportunity, especially for me, because it was like, okay, how long are we going to grow different types of lettuces, which is important. So I'm not, saying that it's not important. It's good, but as a scientist, it's always exciting to think about other crops, and that's when we focused on exploring the possibility to work with these protein crops like amaranth and fenugreek, not just for the overall biomass, but it's also a source of antioxidants and other compounds like iron or calcium. It can be used both for animal as well as human feed, and also in Derek might be will be explaining a bit about the NAPIC, I think, so which is the National Alternative Protein Innovation Center. So we are looking in UK as well as globally at alternative sources of protein. So this project, it came at the right time for all of us to sit together and brainstorm this idea of testing these kind of crops and thinking a bit beyond lettuce. Next slide, please. Right, so what VFAST consortium brings to the table, that we did some preliminary studies, and I will emphasize on this fact here because the numbers and other data that we will be speaking, myself and Derek, in this presentation, this is still preliminary research, so it has to be tested and trialed for a scaled up version. So we did feasibility study on the high value as well as high protein crops. We had one more millet, which is not going to work. So we are quite brutal in throwing away the crops that are not going to work and only focus on the ones that are going to make sense. But when we say protein crops, energy inputs, that's one of the key things, because lettuce, one reason why it is successful, it takes much less energy, multiple growth cycles. So that's one of the key. However, we are generating the data which proves that we can make these kind of crops energy efficient, as well as we have our partner RheEnergise to work on the other side, energy side of the things as well. And that's where the third point here was the energy source, and that ties in with the solution that RheEnergise brings in terms of installation of high density, the hydropower close to the vertical farm. So you get not just this system, but a full-fledged system, including energy and the storage solutions as well. Next slide, please. Right, so this is just the high-level figures based on the preliminary data that we have on amaranth and fenugreek. So as you see the table below here, so amaranth yield in field and vertical farm, and take that with a pinch of salt because I had to go through some of the papers and reviews to come up with these the yield in the field as it was reported. So it might be higher or lower on specific treatments, that's different, but in the vertical farm, as you can see, it leads to 15 to 22x more protein. And the overall land or the area footprint in our vertical farm is around 0.3 to 0.4 meters square per 100 gram of protein. I think based on the data that Derek will show in the next slides, this is really impressive. And the graph over here on the right-hand side that you can see, starting with lamb and mutton and beef, the area that is, or the land used per 100 gram of protein, it's humongous. It's 184 meters square For lamb and mutton, and beef is not short, it's like 163. The lowest one is for maize, which is 3.1 meters square. And look at the numbers that we have here, it's 0.3 to 0.4 meters square. So we are much, much, much below. Again, emphasizing this, that take this with a pinch of salt, because these trials we have run like several times, but we always love to run these at tower level scale to get the final thing, which is actually the economics working here, which I think in the next presentation for VFAS we will be able to show you. Okay, and that would be all. I think more detail will be provided by Derek in his presentation. Now I would just like to acknowledge some people. Next slide, Mark. It's the James Hutton Institute, especially Martina. She's done all the analysis for us, and obviously our collaboration with Derek. Nick Bennett, so I'm just the speaker here. Nick is the scientist who has worked on it, and Kenneth, who's a project manager, he has been sitting in all the meetings to make this thing work. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tanvir, that's brilliant. Just a quick point on this. I'm sure many people in the audience will have questions that they want to ask. If I can ask you, we'll take them all at the end. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, plonk them in the Q&A tab. We are picking up on them, and we will get to them, as many of them as we can, at the end, towards the end of the webinar. With that in mind, I believe that puts us in a place for me to hand it over to Derek for the next section of our presentation.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. It shows you what kind of day I've had. I thought it was still morning. So going back to what Tanvir was saying, we're not denigrating lettuce as something that vertical farm grows, because actually the demand for that is enormous. But what else can we grow in there, and what can we use its phenomenal capabilities? Now, I'll put you back a couple of weeks to anyone who wanted to go into the Co-op or Marks and Spencer's to get some food. You suddenly saw the shelves were bare. So food security is a real issue at the moment, not just for production, but actually for getting it out on the shelves. But actually food security has gone up on everyone's agenda because of interesting geopolitical activities, let's put it that way, and climate change. So we need a capability of growing food regardless of come rain, come shine, come hail, come snow. And vertical farming and controlled environment offers that. But life is more than lettuce. We need protein and other nutrients to live. So as a collective with ourselves, and actually we've been doing something, we've been work with others as well, looking at targeting things like protein crops. Protein's a key nutrient. And we came upon amaranth as one to look at. It's clearly, it's kind of in the cereal species. It's really well used in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And it's got many benefits. It has all the essential amino acids in its protein complement. Now, that's really unusual for cereals. Normally, they're quite low in lysine. This one's high in lysine. And generally, all aspects of it are palatable. The seeds you pound into a flour, the leaves are completely edible. Next slide, please. Okay, and all of this is many thanks to Martina, who's been doing this, and some collaborations from other partners like our academics and people like Vertical Future as well. They've helped in aspects of this. So what we decided to look at was a selection of different amaranths in here that clearly had different diversities because we wanted to see what the flexibility of the vertical farm system was in terms of that. And you can see here by growing it under set conditions, there's 4 different times: Passion, Red Aztec, for obvious reasons, Pygmy Torch, and Fat Spike, presumably because the leaves are kind of chunky-esque. But you can see the difference in profile when you're growing them. Up to 21 days, they're kind of similar heights, but suddenly when you get to 35 days, some of them get incredibly leggy. And that leggy bit, the stem, is not particularly palatable. Maybe for some, but it's not for me. I'll tell you that for nothing. Next slide, please. So based on that, analyses were undertaken to look at it, and it all depends on how you want to present the data. So in here, we're not talking about the seed because that's growing up to a significantly larger crop. We're talking about the leaf because it's protein packed as well. We're looking at different yields in that, and you can see there's a clear variation on the top left here in variation, whether you're growing it at 21 days or 35 days. But bear in mind, when you get to 35 days, you've got a lot of waste in the stem, so we need to think about when to harvest. A lot of people completely forget that. They think, oh, they grow it at this point outside, we'll just harvest it then. Whereas actually sometimes harvesting earlier is best for your nutrient complement and your selling point. So if you then do the protein analysis, we can see, and going back to what Tanvir was talking about, calculating back on protein in terms of protein per kilogram per meter squared per year, you can see there's clearly an element of variation in there according to variety, going down from Passion and Red Aztec up to Pygmy Torch and Fat Spike. But then again, depending on when you're harvesting, but the patterns are kind of similarish. And also, we have to be very clear on what we're talking about. Are we talking about protein in fresh weight or dry weight? And I think we have to be talking about dry weight, to be honest. So you can see the variation between them actually isn't necessarily that huge in terms of just the standard growing conditions there, but it is very different depending on when you harvest them. So harvesting them roughly about a fortnight early clearly has a higher innate protein content in them. And of course, if you do it from fresh weight, it's less exaggerated, but then that's kind of all driven by water content. Next slide, please. So now we'd selected one of them, we wanted to look at, see, well, what's the impact of the environment on these, and particularly for the usual thing, if you want to increase protein, throw nitrogen at it. That's the classic approach. So in this case, we've got the control, which is the fertigation system that IGS has. You've then got a diluted one, which is EC20. You've got a concentrated one. We've got a formulated coated nutrient, which is AgroCoat. You've got a microbial system to help fix nitrogen, and then you've just got a foliar application. And you can see, to be honest, there is not much in it on these systems. And I think what's interesting is for the changing around the innate nutrient system. So if you look at the control EC20 and EC30, it looks like arguably more by luck than design, we hit the sweet spot for just fertigation nutrient in that. So making it lower didn't work, making it higher didn't really have much of a benefit. Where we did see benefit though was in the AgroCoat one. And what that is a slow release of urea that's then converted into ammonium nitrate for the plant. That also has a benefit in that if you add a lot of nitrogen far too fast, like urea, it can be converted into just ammonia, and which is then released. Sorry, the previous one's converted to ammonium. If you put too much nitrogen in, it's converted to ammonia, and then that just volatilizes and goes off, and you've got implications for greenhouse gas. I think that's me. This is thanks to the casting crew, particularly Martina, who's done all this, and to the people identified here at IGS that actually grew the plants. As I say, this is a really small slice of what VFast has done. Our next webinar will show the rest. Thank you. I think we're moving now on to Francis. I think.
Yes, I think
Francis,
so.
there you are.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, so I am Francis Sanderson. I am with the James Hutton Institute, and I'm a life cycle analyst. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about the carbon cost, the carbon footprint associated with producing, in this case, I'm going to use basil as an example crop through vertical farming. So first of all, I just wanted to do a little overview about what my models kind of look like. So this is just a simplified representation of what goes into the modeling I do, using data that has come from people like Martina and from IGS. So what I do is I take information on all of the inputs. So that would be our seeds and our substrate, our fertigation, which is our water and nutrients, and how much electricity is required. And what I do is I model that back. So I look at everything that goes into producing and obtaining them. And then we look at the actual phases of growing in itself. So in this case, we've got it separated out into 3 main phases: the sowing phase, the germination phase, and the growing phase, all of which takes electricity and all of these other inputs coming in. After that, we then harvest the product. At which point we get the product itself. We then have waste products that go for processing, and of course we've got cleaning. There's various points of cleaning, but a big clean at the end there. So that's just gives a flavour for the kind of stuff that goes into the model. Next slide, please. So bearing in mind that with given all of the inputs, why is energy in particular so important, which is kind of the key of what I'm looking at the moment. I should also say here that I'm going to be focusing on carbon footprint for this talk, but we obviously look at quite a few different categories in general. Why is energy so important? Well, that's simply because when we look at the carbon footprints found in literature for vertical farm produce, then hotspot analysis, which is what we do when we look, rather than look at absolute figures, we look at relative contributions. So we want to see what's the most important thing contributing to that end carbon footprint, regardless of how high or low it is. And that's, so we use that hotspot analysis to identify that. And with that, what we found is that the contribution of electricity production and usage ranges anywhere from 35 to actually just over 90%. But regardless of that, it's always the single most dominant contributor. So if we want to look at lowering the carbon footprint associated with vertical farm produce, we really need to be starting to look at the electricity. Next slide, please. So this is one of those hotspot analysis that I was talking about before. So in my scenario, so what I looked at specifically to look at the importance of that electricity choice is I took the data for producing basil in a vertical farm system, and I ran the exact same figures. The only difference I did was I replaced the choice of electricity used. So I did 7 scenarios here, 3 main grid scenarios. So the first grid scenario was just a Scottish main electric grid. The second one was a UK main electric grid, and actually the Scottish and UK grid are really quite substantially different. So that's really important to know as we go on. And then I also did the Norwegian grid, and that was because the Norwegian grid is very similar to the Scottish, but it has a couple of differences which make for some interesting comparisons. Then we also looked at some kind of pure renewable scenarios. So if we were just using onshore wind, if we were just using offshore wind, if we were using solar, and of course if we were using hydro. So looking at that there's the real main takeaway from there is quite obvious. It's that big blue bar in the middle of every scenario. That is our electricity use. So that tells us very much, as we expect, as was with literature, electricity use is very much the dominant contributor, regardless of what kind of electricity we use. But you will notice that it's different. The relative contribution does change depending on which electricity we use. And that's as simple as, well, I'll show you in a minute, but effectively that's because each of the electricities have a different carbon footprint associated with each kilowatt, with producing 1 kilowatt hour, and that comes out. So really, I think the next slide gives you a few examples of that, but first of all, we'll talk through this one. So the main takeaway here is that you've got your lowest contribution with the hydro, and that's at 78%, and your highest with the UK, and that's actually at close to 99% contribution. So again, it's definitely the major contribution there, but we do see a variation in it. The other contribution, kind of major contributors for anyone that's interested, you can clearly see it's that dark green, the brown and the purple. And that is our fertigation and our different waste products. So the substrate and the crop residue. But as you can see, the comparison, there's really none. It's a few percent as opposed to, 80+%. Next slide, please. So this is why we saw that fluctuation there. It is that to produce, so this is produce 1 kilowatt hour of a few examples of different types of electricity. So you've got your higher end stuff, your non-renewables up at the top there with oil and gas. So you can see oil, which is 1.28 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent to produce 1 kilowatt hour. Gas is under half of that, so that's quite a big saving. But if you go down to the bottom there with some hydropower, that's still a massive difference. Nuclear is an interesting one because nuclear is very low as well, but of course it may be low carbon, but it's not renewable. I just really throw that one in there as a talking point because inevitably someone always asks about nuclear. But yes, we won't. That doesn't really feature into the grids we're looking at. So next slide, please. Right, so this is what the absolute figures look like. So again, this is the same data, the same basil produced, just using different electricities. And this is the carbon footprint for each. So we'll ignore the elephant in the room for just now, and we'll look at the main cluster. So the main clusters are all pretty close. If you look at the Norwegian grid, the Scottish grid, onshore and offshore wind, and even hydro, although it's notably lower. So you've got hydro at your lowest there at 0.41 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of Basel produced. And then you go up to your Scottish onshore and offshore, which are kind of clustered really tightly together. So you've got your onshore at 1.28, you've got your Scottish at 1.47, and your offshore at 1.75. Or sorry, I've got that off and on mixed up there. But yeah, so they're quite tightly clustered. There's a difference there, but it's not major. And then you drop down to Norway, which is lower again at 1.14. So not a million miles away, but it is different to Scotland, which is interesting given that their grids are quite similar. So we'll get into that in a minute. So then the two that jump out are, of course, solar. So that is a renewable electricity, but it's looking quite high. That's largely because of the photovoltaics production of photovoltaic cells. But yes, nonetheless, we can see that that is a higher choice than when it comes to even like the Scottish grid. And then you've got the UK grid. Now, the UK grid is massive. The UK grid comes in there. Oh, sorry, I should say that solar was coming in at 5.9. But the UK grid is at almost 20. It is at 19.86. So that is just an incredible difference when we look at that compared to the other national grids, and especially when we look at that compared to our lowest one at hydro, that's almost 20 compared to 0.41. I mean, that's an incredible difference. So why do we see this? Next slide, please. So bearing in mind what you already saw about the carbon footprint cost of producing 1 kilowatt hour of different types of energy and how that changes depending on the method, this is what the grids look like. So I will say that this is based on 2022 data, so it is in the process of being updated, but so there might be differences, but nonetheless this stands. So what we've got here is we've got Scotland in 2022 was hit 100% renewable usage. Now I do say usage rather than production because Scotland was still producing non-renewable electricity. They just exported it all. They preferentially kept the clean electricity, which gave them nice low figures for what we ran here. But I do feel it's important to make that distinction. But what you got effectively is the Scottish grid was made up largely of onshore wind. That's coming in at 67.1%. And then you've got offshore wind and hydro coming in at just around about 14-15% for each of them. The other in this case was just other renewable electricity as well, just miscellaneous stuff. The difference with Norway, which I said was interesting, is Norway was not at 100% renewable usage. It still had, it was only about 2%, but it still had a couple of percent there in gas and oil, which was interesting. But the biggest, most significant part was that it was predominantly hydro. So its hydro was at almost 90%. It was at 89.2% of its grid came from hydroelectricity, and then with a little bit of onshore wind there as well. So even though Norway had some high cost electricities going into their grid through gas and oil, by being predominantly hydro, they were still able to produce a figure lower than the Scottish grid. So I just find that quite interesting, quite a good comparison to show you how the mix really matters. But then let's get on to the UK. So what we've got with the UK is in 2022, it was still at around about 40% non-renewable usage, and that's really why you had that really big difference, because you had a lot of high cost electricity from a carbon point of view. So while they did still have renewable in there, that was the big difference that you see between the predominantly renewable usage and the predominantly non-renewable usage, and that's what caused that. So the takeaway from this is that, actually, can you go on a slide? I'm not quite sure what I've got next. Oh yeah, that's fine, just leave that. The takeaway from this really is that electricity choice really matters if you want to produce sustainable products. So be that if you are looking at a grid or if you are looking at even just individual renewable electricity choices, but also region matters. So while there is preferential choices if you're producing something in Scotland, that is going to be more pressing if you're somewhere like using the English grid. Then you will have more incentive to looking at renewable options rather than just relying on grid electricity. So this slide is really not much to take along here. I just quite like to show it because this is, if we look at all of those scenarios compared to the literature, what we find in literature for producing, I won't say, it says basil there, it shouldn't, it's actually similar products. I couldn't get enough information just purely on basil, sadly. But this gives you an idea of how it looks. So what we have here is the range found in literature. As you can see, it's quite massive, and that's not too surprising given what we saw looking at the electricity, the relevance of electricity and the variation you find in electricity itself. But what we find is that cluster, our cluster from before with the wind powers and the hydropower and the Scottish Norwegian grid, they all are within what we did see within literature, although they're definitely on the lower side, with hydro there almost down as far as the very lowest reporting I could find. And then you've got solar, who's sitting up there on the higher end, still within what we've found, still within the range, but definitely on the higher end. And of course, UK is not even on this particular diagram because I couldn't fit it in and show you anything else. Next slide. And this is essentially where I finish off. It's like, so bearing in mind the importance of electricity choice and the importance, the relative importance of electricity to carbon footprint, what does energy storage mean in this context? Well, effectively with the energy storage, although I'm sure that we're going to go on and hear about that in a lot more detail, but effectively the aim is to maximize energy use efficiency. And if we do that, we can lower the associated greenhouse gas emissions cost. So by doing that, we could either take comparatively less favourable electricity sources, such as grid electricity, and turn them more competitive. Or if they were combined with the preferential choices, then we've got something really quite exciting. And that's me. I'm afraid I do not have an acknowledgement slide. That was an omission of me, but I would like to say thank you very much to IGS who have provided the data for this, and to Martina as well.
Great stuff. Thank you, Francis. I'm going to jump straight into the next one, but just a reminder to everyone, do put your questions in the Q&A tab. We will pick them up as we go along. Next up, we have Adam from RheEnergise. So Adam, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much. I feel like that leads on really nicely onto our next kind of what I'm speaking about now, about energy storage with RheEnergise. So yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for joining the webinar, everyone. I'm Adam, so I am the GIS analyst at RheEnergise, one of the project leads for the VFAS consortium as a whole. So basically my kind of day-to-day role in RheEnergise, as well as for the VFAS consortium, is essentially feasibility studies and really kind of looking into that co-location modelling and co-location kind of viability between vertical farms and our HT hydro systems themselves. If you just quickly go on to the next slide, please, Mark, and then I can get a bit more detail. Thank you. So just kind of wanted to kick off initially on how RheEnergise kind of fits into the VFAS consortium as a whole. So as mentioned by Derek, Tanvir, and Francis previously, we are an energy storage solution. So we essentially take the basics of pumped hydro systems and then introduce our kind of bespoke fluid suspension into that whole solution. And then we're able to open a lot more prospective sites through our areas of interest. So for the VFAS consortium, that being Scotland, as everyone here is aware, Scotland is very hilly, very mountainous. And just by introducing our solution alone, we are opening up a huge bracket of new storage solutions into the area, which is great for co-locating with vertical farms as well, as mentioned previously. If you go on to the next slide, please, just a bit more detail on pumped hydro again. So as mentioned, we take our R19 or our bespoke fluid suspension, introduce that to pumped hydro kind of technologies with our own bespoke kind of components. So we have our reservoir at the upper end of the hillside, and then we also introduce one to the lower, and then we pass very similar, identical to pumped hydro through a turbine from the upper to lower reservoir and then generate our electricity. As it also mentioned, previously by Tanvir and Derek and Francis, energy prices are a massive, I guess, blocker for vertical farms, and our energy storage solution will kind of hopefully bring this this costing and this pain point down, and kind of have a better synergy between vertical farms and our HD hydro systems. So that's RheEnergise in a nutshell, just in the 2 slides. I will go on to speak about how our work packages kind of are developed within the VFAST consortium, and kind of the main kind of analysis that I've been doing on my end. So I am the GIS analyst, and one of the main work packages is to identify co-location sites in Scotland between vertical farms and our HD hydro systems. So this slide is essentially showing the feasibility throughout Scotland and the UK on the smaller figure on the left. So there is again a very strong correlation between topographical areas, so areas of elevation, hillsides and mountains, and feasibility for our systems, RheEnergise, and for vertical farms co-located with them. So the color map on the bottom left-hand corner just kind of indicates that the darker regions are more prospective, and then the yellow regions are still very feasible, but just lower potential than those higher potentials in the darker red. So yeah, as you can see by the image on the right of this slide, huge amounts of potential for our co-located systems throughout Scotland, making it a great area of interest for VFAST and for the co-location of our 2 systems. So hopefully we're laying a very strong foundation for moving forwards for kind of exploring maybe UK synergies and other kind of projects after VFAST, which would be great. If you could go on to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more about kind of the constraints that we're introducing into our mapping. So when I'm outlining these prospective locations throughout Scotland, we're taking into account numerous constraints into the modelling. So the main focus for our systems is head potential, so that being the difference in elevation between the upper and lower reservoirs. And then we introduce other constraints such as proximity to grid, proximity to roads, the land ownership, and also kind of proximity to renewables, as co-locating with vertical farms, HD hydro systems, as well as renewables is just another great way of obtaining that 24/7 kind of clean energy demand profile, which I think is ultimately a very appealing goal for vertical farms and for us alone and the grid. So this is just outlining the constraints, but if you can move on to the next slide, please, we can start to talk about the initial results. So once I've passed all these constraints through my model, we're then able to pinpoint the highest feasible locations as shown on this map here. We also introduce SSSI, protected areas, urban areas into the constraints, just so that we know that the results that we're getting aren't kind of infringing on any of these areas. So again, a lot more feasible, and also hopefully potential to co-locate with other renewables as opposed to just our battery storage solution and the grid itself. So just for kind of more insight into a deliverable for the VFAST consortium, one of them is to create an interactive map, which should hopefully be hosted on our website in the next few weeks. So you can go on and you can go and see each of these sites, attributes onto those, so you can get a better understanding of the head potential, the possible energy generation, as well as proximity to local infrastructure, all with the click of a button. And it looks very nice, if I do say so. So that's initial results. And then on to next slide, please. This just goes into a bit more detail on what you can find and what I just mentioned on attributes associated with each of these sites. So here, this is actually showing a 5 megawatt prospective location, and then you have your attributes associated with each of these locations on the right here. Normally, we would be able to go in and then fully map out our systems, and then also identify areas for the vertical farms to be situated. So looking at the visual on the left, the main green point is the point at which the HD hydro system would be situated. And then the hatched area is essentially all the viable optional space for a vertical farm around that point. So as you go into the map itself and the deliverables, there's huge amounts of space available for vertical farms surrounding our HD hydro systems, which is fantastic. I mean, maybe you could have a singular vertical farm, numerous around this site. It's all things that we can kind of develop upon throughout this project. And as we kind of work towards the end of the quarters and get to the end of the project, we one of the deliverables will be outlining this just kind of optimized approach to co-locating our systems. And then onto the final slide, I think is just essentially an overview of the site statistics. So we have our average kind of difference between our distance to substation, our head potentials to the solar farms and also to the wind farms. I won't touch on this massively, but essentially within our analysis, we've taken on some archetypes in size, so 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt and 20 megawatt systems. And it kind of shows the difference between those statistics. And then finally, on the last slide, is essentially just an overview of how the interactive map will look once it's finalized and uploaded onto the VFAST website for everyone to kind of go in and delve into kind of statistics and the most feasible locations for our co-location between HT hydro and vertical farms. So that's me. Thank you very much.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, Adam. Just before we move into the Q&A session and I come out of sharing so I can see you all again, just a couple of notes here. There will be an upcoming demo day, the first of several, in June. We'll be releasing details of that very shortly. So if the places will be limited on that one. So if you want to come and see James Hutton Institute and IGS's very cool systems, then do keep an eye out for that. There will be a RheEnergise demo day at their brand shiny new facility as well. Coming, and we need to confirm a date on that, but again, keep your eyes open. And then just generally do keep in contact with us, reach out to us, get involved, come and find out more about what we're doing through the various links there, and we're happy to share those elsewhere as well. So I'm going to come out of sharing now so that I can actually see you all again, so that would be nice. And with that in mind, I'm just going to say please do put your questions in the Q&A tab if you haven't already. There is one here in the chat I think I've seen, so I'm going to take that one first. I think so. Afternoon all, what do you see as the biggest challenge in integrating energy storage solutions into vertical farming systems, especially when it comes to scaling up? And I'll just throw that out to anyone that feels like getting us started.
From our side, I mean, our system is designed in such a way that we can match it or we can run it with different types of energy sources. I mean, that's one of the things that IGS has aimed for. Obviously, I mean, I'm not the expert to talk you through all the specifications related to engineering and the grid and everything, but we do have teams. So feel free to reach out to us to understand, how our system can actually integrate with these different types of energy storage solutions. We are more than happy to help you there. The other part, I think might be RheEnergise, or someone might be able to take up.
Yeah, I can touch on slightly. I'd say not the greatest, just the challenge would be essentially the scaling our systems to vertical farms, which is completely fine. That's obviously very, very transferable. Usually vertical farms, just from kind of what we've seen at the moment, seem to be a lot smaller than kind of the archetypes or systems that we'd be implementing at the moment, but that doesn't rule anything out at all. It just essentially means that you're able to scale at that location by introducing more vertical farms to align kind of with our systems themselves. So say we've got a 5 megawatt HT hydro system and you have a 500 kilowatt to 1 megawatt vertical farm. In that sense, if you're wanting to maximize our 5 megawatts, then you could have a cluster of vertical farms, say, around that one site, and then we can work just from scaling our HT hydro systems along with the vertical farms.
Okay, all right, thank you. To pick up on a slightly different question that often comes up in these things, there were some quite specific crops there. So I guess the question is, like, are other crops available? What are the constraints here? Is it, what else might we think about doing with a system like this?
Well, it's worth thinking about the if you think of the vertical farm, it's a hammer that can hit many nails. So if you can grow it, it will grow better on a vertical farm. I've yet to see, and Tanvir will probably come into this, I've yet to see anything really fail in there. And actually productivity can always be improved. Again, it's the flexibility of the solution that appeals to me. So you can then have your vertical farm, depending on what you want. So we're talking about, you're trying to get a community vertical farm done in Orkney, for example. That one will run in a different manner to the large giga farms that IGS are running. So the local ones may actually run like an Airbnb, where people will rent out slots and grow stuff, different stuff that they want when they need it. And again, going back to the pictures of the co-op shelves when they were ransomware, you've got local production where you need it. Or if the ferries don't work, which sometimes happens in Scotland, the supply chain can be supported by on-island production. So that flexibility is there to grow anything they want. Now it could be, and then that can be mirrored back to any place. So you can go from leafy greens to ingredient crops. It could be flowers. It could be small trees that can then be planted outside. The areas we're trying to go into now is looking at dwarf medicinal cannabis. And you've got a value chain that's hugely different across all of those. But you've got flexibility in the growing system that will allow that to happen. I mean, it's interesting that medicinal cannabis stuff, the energy cost probably won't be much of a problem there because your end value crop is so valuable. But I think if you think from that basis principle, you will increase your profitability. So it's good to see that coming in. And I think what else you can do with it might depend on where you put it. It's interesting. I know farmers on a smaller level might want it because they have wind farms. They might not have the hydro, but they've got wind farms. The other great example of controlled environment is Iceland was the largest producer of bananas in Europe because they had geothermal energy in glasshouses. So again, there is no one size fits all of this. Actually, it's just that it's an incredibly flexible system. What do you want to grow might be the answer. Of course, the other one might be the next generation COVID vaccine might be grown in a vertical farm.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Lots to think about there. Sorry, minor technical problem. With consideration to maintenance costs, is there an optimal size of hydro, or is any hydro good to integrate given the UK has the highest industrial energy costs in the world? Big question.
Good question.
Yeah, Adam and Lizzie, I guess that's primarily one for you, but I'll take anyone who wants to have a crack at it.
I can jump in here.
Oh, Lizzie, please. Yeah, do.
Hi, yeah, I'm Lizzie. I work with Adam at RheEnergise in the commercial team. If you think about maintenance costs, I mean, we're comparable to conventional pumped hydro, so not generating hydro, but pumped storage hydro. We don't, I mean, when we talk about what we're building, we're looking at 50-year systems or longer. So a lot of the pumped hydro in the UK has been actively generating and storing energy for 50 plus years, and there's systems that have been going for 100 years. So there are maintenance costs, but they're built into what we call the levelized cost of storage, which is how we evaluate the lifetime cost of a system, considering the kind of cost per unit of energy stored. And when you look at that, it's comparable to other energy storage technologies, and in fact is cheaper. So I'm not sure how, the UK's, I mean the maintenance costs are a relatively small slice of the total cost of the project. So compared to the capex, I think if you're thinking about the UK's high industrial costs, then yes, it is more expensive to build a system in the UK. I don't have insight as to how that would affect operating or maintenance costs, to be honest.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in there with anything? Yeah, Derek?
Maybe it's kind of timely that Scotland is heading into its water abstraction reduction. So we're heading into drought. Lizzie or Adam, what's the implications for that going forward, potentially on hydro? Is it just it doesn't impact it really much, or?
Yeah, so I mean, as Adam mentioned, we don't actually pump water, we pump a proprietary fluid, which is 2.5 times denser. So that's kind of our key value proposition, unlocking those additional sites. And that basically means partly because of the reduced volume of a system, because it's 2.5 times denser, which means systems are 2.5 times smaller for the same power. But they're also quite low water volume. So it's about 10% of the water requirements versus conventional pumped hydro for the same power. So we're active in the UK, but we're also active in a lot of other markets. So looking at places like Spain, Chile, Australia, which do have those very dry, arid landscapes. So we unlock the lower head sites, but we also unlock potential in those kind of desert, arid landscapes.
Cool.
All right, brilliant. Well, in the absence of other questions, that brings us pretty neatly to the end of the time we have allocated for this call. Oh, hang on, no, before I spoke too soon. Following on, I presume solar integration is worth investment as a secondary fallback from dry months. I mean,
yeah, I can come in again. Sorry.
Yeah, go on. Go. Yeah.
On the energy piece, I mean, when we're talking about kind of integrating energy storage, that is part of a hybrid energy system. So that would be coupled with either on-site solar and or wind, or you'd be drawing low cost power from the grid, which tends to be at times of high renewable generation. So when those costs are cheapest is when we have a lot of solar or wind on the grid already. So yes, you would be using solar or wind or hydro or whatever the cheapest locally available source of electricity is to charge your system, and then covering those high cost periods with that electricity, which you regenerate from your system when prices rise on the grid.
Right. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I am going to wrap it there because, we are approaching the end of the time we have available. Thank you to all of you for coming to join us today and for the questions that you've asked. Thank you to all our speakers for filling people in. And yes, do reach out to us, follow us on LinkedIn, come and have a chat with us, rugby tackle us in the corridor somewhere if you see us, whatever works. Yeah, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you, folks.
Bye-bye.
All right.